So you want to start with permaculture but don't know anything about permaculture or gardening. My advice is start now. Hi, I'm Eva Maria from Grandvisio, a landscape design company. Welcome to this channel, Plant with Great Vision. Today we'll cover tips on getting you started with permaculture. So the first tip is start before you know anything. Just go to the store, order some seeds or seedlings and plant. Doesn't matter where, if it's in the ground or in containers, sitting on your windowsill, just do it. Okay, so this is probably the most controversial permaculture advice ever, but hear me out. There will never be a time when you're completely ready or when you know absolutely everything about plants. I don't. And why am I saying this? This is because I was a victim of analysis paralysis and it kept me from going. If not my husband, that's super impatient, I would probably have waited 2 years to start a permaculture garden. And guys, having everything organized is super important and we'll go through the list. But firstly, just have some fun, go to the store, buy something and see what happens. I think you will develop natural curiosity as to what to do with those seeds. You will start thinking, will they like acid soil or will they do well in wet conditions or do they like full sunshine? So you will be already in the process and the real fun will begin. Okay, the next tips are for real adventurers. So people who want to do everything from scratch without buying soil, without buying compost. It's just you, your surroundings, raw materials, hand tools and seeds. That's it. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, so what's the second tip? Water. So water is number one consideration for us permaculture designers. So that means before we even start planning out the different planting areas or before we even decide where to do fencing or where to put structures, we will first consider the placement of water system. Then we consider access and then structures. But if you want to start a permaculture garden, I assume you already have a designated space for your veggies. Even so, it's so good to have a water plan. Do you, for example, take it from nearby creek? Great! That's an amazing asset, but what are you going to do if 1 year it's going to dry out because the season will be so dry? So it's good to have a plan. So the primary questions are, where do you want to source the water from? And where do you want to store it? I will give you a hint and you probably already know the answer, rainwater. You know, with the era of poisoned soils, this is our safest bet, trust me. So you can store rainwater in tanks or in ponds or in mini ponds. If you have a backyard, you can collect it from roof of your home, of your glass house, of your chicken coop or all at once. But there is one important consideration. You need to consider what's going to happen when the tanks are full. So you will need an overflow pipe. This is just for safety reasons because if your tank might explode and water will not exit properly to your designated area, which should be an area that is fine to receive the excess water. For example, it could be a ditch near your garden, like a mini swale, where it's okay to have that sort of excess water. Or it could be a pond, or it could be an orchard. Building ponds, however, will require some knowledge about shape of the land or topography. But as a beginner, you can just start by observing what is happening when it rains outside. For example, can you see some wet areas, some spots where the water is sort of naturally collected? Do you want the water there? Yes? Great. Okay. So maybe you can dig some soil and create like a mini pond. Maybe you could widen the area even further. However, if it's not desired to have water there, maybe you could divert it to more desirable areas, for example, your orchard or a pond, for example. So you could create a trench and to prevent water from washing it off, you could lay it with stones on the bottom and see what happens. See if that trench, that ditch effectively diverts the water to your designated area. So it's all fun. The most important thing to do is to not be overwhelmed. You don't need a crazy irrigation system. Just experiment and observe the nature. Okay, perfect. So you've got water to irrigate your plants. You've identified wet spots and you know where the potential dry areas are. So now you can address it, and then we can move on to the next tip on our list. Okay, the third tip is to look around and see if you can find some resources. Can you see grass? Can you make grass clippings? Can you see fallen leaves? Can you see fallen branches? Do you cook a lot and produce lots of kitchen scraps? Well, I hope you have answered yes to at least one of those questions. Because if you did, and you have access to some raw materials, you can create compost. What's compost? Compost is a type of organic matter that is produced through the decomposition of various biodegradable materials such as kitchen scraps, yard waste, and other plant-based materials. It is commonly used as a soil amendment to improve the quality and fertility of soil. To show you how to create a quick 18-day compost, I am sending you off to my teacher from Permaculture Research Institute of Australia, the one and only Geoff Lawton. The link should be here and in the description below. But I think without access to compost, there is no point in gardening, really. Because even if you have a great soil, at some point you will need to feed the soil with nutrients. So yeah, I think it's best to start early with compost and master this tremendous art. Now I feel like I need to create tip number 3A because it's related to compost. If you have access to some leftover organic material, you can save it for later and you can apply it to your soil. So the aim of all that is to create a mold, which is super important in arid areas because it helps to retain moisture in the soil, it cools off the soil, and it releases also nutrients to the soil. Okay, so with these 3 tips, you're basically ready to rock. You can produce amazing crops, amazing organic garden. But for your site to become a permaculture site, there are just a few extra steps. Let's move on to tip number 4, analyze your site. Okay, so it's really good to create unique characteristics of your site. For example, to consider sun intensity, sun exposure, wind patterns, rainfall patterns, or severe weather events. So for example, if you created an access or pathway, and this pathway happens to funnel a wind, that means you have created a special microclimate. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. For example, if that pathway, which has some shrubs and trees on both sides, just brings, for example, a cold summer wind towards home and a window, let's say, then you might have created something actually good and you might save some energy bills, energy that would be used on, for example, cooling your home, right? So basically what I'm saying is that we want to plan everything ahead of the time so that everything harmonizes together. So for example, if you're creating that pathway, it has to harmonize with structures and it has to harmonize with water systems as well as forces that are present on site. This way, we can save ourselves so much hassle, energy, money, resources right at the beginning. Okay, so the next tip is about creating different functions for one design element. What does it mean? This means, for example, that if we create, let's say, a chicken coop, we want chickens to serve different functions. Of course, we get eggs from chickens, but we want them to do something for us and we want them to stay healthy. And the best way forward would be to invite them to our garden, for example, at the end of the growing season, and let them scratch around, eat all the bugs, and basically fertilize our soil. The same goes for ducks. Another example would be having a greenhouse. And if you live in a temperate climate with really harsh winters, you probably noticed that the greenhouse really helps to prolong the growing season, but sometimes it may not be as warm inside as you would want it to be. So it's good to use a water tank inside the greenhouse. So whenever the sun is shining, the tank with water, ideally a black tank, will act as a mass storage heater. So that way you might increase the temperature of your greenhouse with no additional cost, right? So we have different functions there. So this is just an example, guys. You can play around. The best exercise to do would be to take a piece of paper and come up with different elements that you would like to have. For example, chickens, rape, stone wall, a glass house, tool shed, whatever you've got, and see how you could connect different elements. So yeah, I think it's a real fun. Let me know if you've tried this exercise and if you came up with some great ideas for your site. I'm really curious. So once we planned everything out, considering climate, different weather events, forces, and interconnected everything, bearing in mind that we want to decrease our energy input and maximize output, in a good way, of course, then we're basically ready to rock. Now we can plant. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing to my channel if you got value out of this video. And don't forget to hit the like button if you liked the video and the topic.